Good evening, and welcome to the fourth in our World Cup Comes to Seattle speaker series being organized by the Global Sport Lab. We're really glad that you're here. My name is Ron Krabill. I'm the director of the Global Sport Lab, and I've been looking forward to this session on Iran and the World Cup ever since we were able to schedule our special guest for this evening. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that we're operating as a hybrid program with about 80 students in the room and now more than 300 participants registered online. So following an initial conversation with our guests, there will be opportunities for Q&A both in the room and online using the platform Slido. And we will put up a screen with Slido instructions for those of you online when that time comes. Thanks once again to our co-sponsors, the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at UW-Bothell, the Responsible Business Law Initiative of the Barer Institute at UW School of Law, and the Jackson School of International Studies. Now, I am really pleased to introduce tonight's guest. Niki Akhavan is an associate professor of media and communication studies at the Catholic University of America. She is the author of Electronic Iran, The Politics of an Online Evolution, published in 2013. And she has published numerous book chapters and articles on Iranian narrative and documentary cinema, Iranian sports and media, as well as on state media productions and policies. She is also a published academic translator, most recently of Mohsen Kadivar's Human Rights in Islam, published in 2021. Niki, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So I'm going to have to put the mic up to my speaker as well so that folks in the room can hear you. So let's start by delving a little deeper into the obvious questions hanging over Iran's participation in the World Cup. So even prior to the attacks launched by the US and Israel, the Iranian team's scheduled match in Seattle was beset with problems, with the team facing controversies at home and Trump's travel ban posing challenges for fans and the team alike. It seems that things have only gone downhill from there. Last week, news broke that Trump's special envoy had lobbied FIFA to replace Iran with Italy at the World Cup. So could we start with this news as an entry point to our discussions and what it tells us about the geopolitical implications of the World Cup in Seattle?
Sure. First, thank you again for inviting me. I've been to your campus one time before, and I was really delighted by it. And it had really good energy, really smart students, really smart faculty. So I'm happy to be here, and I wish I were there in person, but it's great to be here with you. And I really appreciate that we're starting with with the question about what happened last week between the U.S. Special Envoy and FIFA. Not just because it's the most recent development in the eternal question, it seems, of whether or not Iran is going to come to the World Cup, but it's a great entry point into peeling away all the layers that are at play when it comes to Iran's participation in the World Cup. I don't know your audience, so I don't know, whether there are fans among the group. Maybe there are some haters among the group, or folks who are just indifferent to the Iranian team. But I think that by the end of our discussion, no matter how you feel about the team itself, it's going to become clear that the Iranian team, both as a team, but even the individual players, are often used as pawns in politics, domestically and on the international level, and that they're under pressure from multiple sides all the time. So when we talk about these challenges that they face, I think it's going to be indicative of the broader challenges that the Iranian populace are facing. And I think that's why these discussions around the World Cup in general are so interesting, because the event, the games, and everything that happens around it becomes this lens for understanding all the complex issues that sometimes we talk about in separate boxes, but then the World Cup brings them all together and you see it all playing out in one place. So the event that you're mentioning is the news that broke was last week on April 22nd. There's a U.S. Special Envoy. It's called Special Envoy for Global Partnerships. And he met with the head of FIFA and he said, "Hey, I have a really great idea. Why don't we swap out Iran for Italy?" Now, the why Iran is obvious, because there's all these questions about Iran even coming, but the Why Italy part actually is connected to Iran as well. And so, as some of you may know, there was this little bit of a tension, or not full on falling out, but tension between the Italian government and Trump, Prime Minister Meloni, the Italian government. She's actually an ally of Trump. But after the Pope came out and very clearly spoke against the war in Iran on legal terms, he said it was an unjust war. He spoke against it on moral terms. He talked about all the victims. Well, that ruffled a lot of feathers in the U.S., and there were strong reactions from from President Trump and from JD Vance and all kinds of important figures in the U.S. establishment. And of course, although the Prime Minister's office is in Italy is aligned with Trump, I mean, this is a red line. You can't go off talking about the Pope. And so they push back against that. And so the U.S. envoy thought, okay, well, to smooth over these relations, we'll just, uh, kick kick Iran under the bus, or what's the expression? Put whatever the expression is.
Yeah.
And so that by itself, it's a bizarre story, right? It's a funny and bizarre story. It's one more story in our contemporary world where you can't believe that this is actually happening. And to their credit, the Italians said, no, of course not. We are four-time world champions. We're not going to get in through the back door. You qualify on the pitch. And the FIFA president said, no, as far as we know, Iran is still coming. They're welcome to come. I guess it was too much open corruption even for FIFA. But in any case, the point is that everybody rejected it, and the Iranians said, no, we're coming. Um, but at the same time, it indicates all the uncertainty around whether or not Iran is going to come. I mean, clearly, if your host nation is going behind your back and trying to offer you as a gift in exchange for better relations with another country, well, you know that by itself is very, very telling. And this is also not the first time the Trump administration has indicated that Iran's participation is uncertain. You may remember that about 2 weeks after the war, on March 12th, President Trump himself put out a Truth Social post that was very confusing, because he said the Iranians are welcome to play, but it's not appropriate for them to come because their safety and security won't be guaranteed, which is a very confusing thing to say. Like, what do you mean I'm welcome, but my safety is not guaranteed? And so the Iranians objected to that, and they said, well, we want, if the host nation can't determine our security, can't guarantee our security, then we want to move venues. And they made an official request to FIFA. They said, can we move our games to Mexico? And actually, Mexico signaled that they were willing. But FIFA, like a week later, said, no, the games are set, the locations are set. Um, so all these uncertainties still remain. And as you indicated, even before the war, there were issues about visa, who gets, well, there's this travel ban that's in place. But on top of the travel ban, there are um, these new requirements. I think I don't know if folks saw this, but on last week, Amnesty put out a statement. Amnesty International, along with 120 other organizations, put out a travel advisory to the U.S. listing a number of reasons why travel to the U.S. Might be an issue for various fans, including things like new rules about having your social media looked at before you enter the country. So this is even for people who've already gotten a visa. So it's sort of the layers of difficulty for the Iranian team would be increased. And the U.S. also indicated earlier that it's conventional when you give visas to teams, like people bring their families. There's like sports minister will come. There's a whole entourage of people that will come. And the U.S. had indicated that they would only be giving like the minimum number of visas for people. So that's sort of also disruptive. There was, and I'll say one more thing, because I don't, you can interrupt me if you think I'm going too long in any
No,
particular.
this is all fantastic.
But there was a BBC Persian report a couple of days ago that said, the Iranians have said, we haven't applied for our visa yet. Again, I don't know what the timelines are for these things, but they seem kind of nonchalant about it. That if we have a issue with a player, we'll deal with it, but we're not very concerned. And it's not clear how much of this is bravado and how much of this is trying to not play their show what their hand is. Again, there's a lot of metaphors that you can read into these kind of exchanges as a metaphor for the broader kind of ceasefire negotiations that are going on. There's a lot of uncertainties, but there's also a lot of deliberate uncertainty, it seems, on both sides. Um, yeah, so I think that is the broader global context in terms of the determining factors. And of course, if there's a full-on war, one of the things that the FIFA president said, he said, well, I hope that when we play the games, things will be in a more peaceful situation. I mean, right now we're in this very fragile ceasefire, and it seems like every single day, the possibility of the war breaking out. I mean, it's 50-50 if you just don't know. I mean, that's the first thing I check in the morning. So that, of course, could be a major determining factor if people can travel or not.
And I'll just add to that last point. I think that I found the whole conversation kind of surreal in the sense that I think it indicates from a perspective here in the United States how disconnected people can actually feel from the war if you're not following it and if you don't have personal connections to it, to the point that we can even have a conversation that sort of gets to like the details of visas and that sort of thing. I'm not sure there's been a precedent for armed combatants actually going to the country that attacked them during for a sporting event. Certainly, two nations at war have been at a third site at the same time, but I don't know that I of a precedent where one actually traveled to the other in the middle of it. And the fact that we can even have the conversation as if it's sort of this distant, sort of abstract thing, which obviously it isn't for the Iranian people, I think is
Right.
pretty surreal.
Yes, I didn't actually. That's a really good point about the two parties being at like the one of the parties to the conflict hosting the games and then the other coming. I mean, during the Cold War, certainly, right, these kinds of things happen, but Cold Wars are different than when there's an active combat. And there's also the question of just forget visas, like, tons of like Airbuses and like the two major airports were heavily, one of them more than the other, damaged. And it's just crazy to think how people are going to get out of the country. Although flights have apparently resumed. A lot of people are having to go through land borders. And I think the Iranians, this is something I should have checked before this event, but I think they practice in Turkey.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I've seen them as will come up, I think, in my other in our discussion. The team is in Iran also, so I don't know if they're going back and forth. And I mean, just imagine the pressure of having to. I mean, how are they even training is another question.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier, the Iranian team's challenges aren't just limited to sort of the international geopolitical questions of what's unfolding on the world stage, but they're also caught in the middle of Iranian political fights, both domestic and in the diaspora. So I wonder if you could speak to the dynamics of how the World Cup plays into some of those conflicts as well.
Sure, yes. Yes, unfortunately, the Iranian team is caught. I- I'll start with the domestic. I mean, there's a domestic power struggle on top of the international power struggles, and the diaspora politics, which is a whole other beast, which is also not a new experience for the team. But I think in terms of the war, without getting into the politics of the war itself, there is a way that, and people who've been against the war have warned against this, that the war would entrench the hardliners more than they already were entrenched in power and make them more uh, not just brazen but arrogant and think that, especially now that they've managed to hold their ground, 40 days into the war. The problem is that on the ground, so even let me step back for 1 second. Even before the war, there were calls to boycott the World Cup inside Iran because of U.S. policy, because of the whole visa situation and the tensions that had been uh, boiling over since Trump was reelected. But now, after the second war, the hardliners have become so much more entrenched that um, it's very hard to tell. First of all, the war environment, it's very hard to tell what information is coming out that's correct and what's not correct, and how much of it is managed disinformation, how much of it is straight up disinformation. But the point is that from the inside, there seems to be some factions who want to prevent the team from coming to play at all. Even though the official stance is we're going to play, there's some people like, no, we're not going to engage with the Americans at all, and forget them, and they're not accommodating to us, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that I saw just yesterday were photos of the team taking pictures at hospitals with soldiers who had lost limbs in the war. And I mean, I don't know anything about weapons, but for some reason, a lot of the casualties that they've seen, there's soldiers who have a lot of limbs missing, or at least one or two limbs. There's this one famous picture that's been circulating of a soldier who lost all four of his limbs. And these pictures came out of the team going and taking pictures um, at the hospital, visiting them, which on the face of it, there's nothing, there's nothing out of the ordinary in the sense that, you know, sports teams or celebrities, they all over the world, they'll go visit hospitals, and in wartime they'll try to cheer up their troops, etc. Like, this is not a unheard of thing. But knowing the kind of pressures that the team is under, and knowing the kind of pressures that they're facing in terms of showing that you're patriotic, showing that you don't have a sort of mixed feelings about the war, that sort of looms over these kinds of public expressions of solidarity with the people. And I'll give you one example that shows this complexities, because again, now the world of soccer of today is different than, you know, 75 years ago, 100 years, I don't, before there were leagues and before we had globalization, the way that we do now. Iran's striker, for example, Sardar Azamoun, his name might be familiar to some of your audience. He actually plays, the league that he plays for is in the UAE. Uh, Shabab Al, no, Shabab Al Ahli, something like this. I may be misremembering the name, but it's a team in the UAE. And after the war, as again, since I don't know your audience, I hope I'm not saying things that they already know too much about. But the war this time around, there's a June war, but this time around, what made it different was after the Iran was attacked, instead of attacking Israel, it attacked its neighbors. So it attacked Persian Gulf Arab states that had US bases, that Iran said these bases are being used against us, so we're going to attack them. And the UAE was one of the most attacked places. And so Sardar Azam, imagine you're an Iranian national team player who plays for the league in UAE. What he does, which probably was not the wisest thing to do, he right in the middle of the war, posts a story to his Instagram of him greeting the ruler of Dubai. There's some exchange. And the man was attacked, not just by the state, but people were enraged that, like, what's with this timing? What are you trying to say? There were rumors. I still am trying to verify. I mean, he still appears to be on the team, but there was, saying he's been kicked off the team. His property has been seized. People, again, not just the state, but people were mad at him as well. And so, again, what is this person as an individual supposed to do? Like he's a national team member. He plays for a league. He's sort of caught in the middle. But his case is just one of many where, you have state propaganda, you have people's own feelings, and then you have pressures from all sides to express your opinion about the war one way or another. And so you're seeing all these images and people fighting over the images. And again, they're supposed to be training for the World Cup. So I think that that's one of the additional sort of pressures on the domestic sphere. Everybody wants to claim them. And again, their politics seem to be all over the place, but I'm just really talking about the pressures that they're facing from all sides. I do want to mention the last World Cup very quickly, if that's okay, because that's also another way that we can get insight into some of the pressures that the team has faced. And I actually think, to speak from personally, I think it's one of the saddest examples of how the team is uh, a victim of both domestic and diaspora politics. So historically, the Iranian national team is like universally beloved by all Iranians. Iran has a lot of leagues, and there's a lot of like fierce competition between domestic teams. Like even in the same city, there'll be teams that are like lifelong rivals, but everybody loved the national team. And, whatever your politics were inside and outside the country, you loved the team. Unfortunately, sometime around 2022, 2021, 22, before the Women Life Freedom movement, there was a very concerted campaign outside the country. Um, and, a lot of the people who supported that campaign are the people who encouraged Trump to attack Iran in this second round of the war. They wanted to boycott the team. And so they got the idea was the narrative they were pushing is that this is not an Iranian team. This is a team that represents the state, doesn't represent the people. And they tried to get FIFA to kick them out. FIFA was like, on what grounds? You have to kick everybody out, so that didn't work. And so there was other efforts to just try to get people to go to the stadiums and again, not object to the state, like literally object to the team as a representative of the state. And the thing that I think makes it so tragic is that, so this is Qatar 2022, and when those games started, Iran was right in the middle of the Women Life Freedom uprising. And there were demonstrations, there were people had been killed. I mean, the killing of a woman is what set off the demonstration to begin with. And many of the team, including actually the team did a collective act as well, had expressed their solidarity with the demonstrators, had expressed that they were sad about what had been happening. There was a game where they had a moment of silence. They refused to sing the national anthem. And so, of course, the state was mad at them. They got pressured, they got threatened, and then yet the diaspora was also threatening them. And so, again, they were caught in the middle of it all. And you won't be surprised to hear they did very bad in that World Cup. That sort of divisive um, moment, it always sticks in my mind. And there's still people who are kind of carrying that line to this day for this World Cup. Although interestingly enough, the war has been, there's like tectonic shift in terms of who's aligned with whom. We kind of have to see how that plays out, assuming that Iran comes to the World Cup.
Mhm. And it strikes me as the classic dilemma that athletes from across the world will face at the World Cup. Like, how much do you speak out on any given social issue? What's happening in the US? What's happening elsewhere? All of those kinds of questions. Yeah, super interesting. So we focused so far on the challenges faced by the Iranian team, both domestic and international, and the ways that they're sort of being used as political pawns in the World Cup and the broader political context, and how that's negatively impacted the team. I wonder if we can talk about any positive potential of what can happen at the World Cup, assuming that Iran actually is able to play. Drawing from past World Cups and considering the current moment, is there any reason to be hopeful that Iran's participation may lead to positive outcomes, either in US-Iran relations, whether state to state or people to people, or in another context?
Well, believe it or not, I'm going to say yes. Despite all this doom and gloom that I think I've painted so far, and despite the fact that I think there's a lot to be worried about, I still believe in the magic of the beautiful game, especially when it's played on the international stage of the World Cup. And it's not magical thinking because we can point to real events and World Cup encounters between the U.S. and Iran specifically to find moments of hopefulness. And I'm going to give you, well, so they played, the Iran and the US have played each other three times, um, twice at the World Cup and once at a friendly, I think it was like in 2000. And both of the World Cup encounters have moments that I think are some of the most beautiful moments in the World Cup. I may be biased in thinking that, but um, they truly are some of the greater moments. So the first one is all the way back in 1998 when the US played Iran in France, in Lyon, France. And in that World Cup, I mean, unfortunately, then as in now, there were no diplomatic relationships between the US and Iran. And so at that point, it had been nearly two decades of strained relations. And on top of the strained relations, um, both the Iranian media and the US media generally depicted like the other side in negative terms. And remember, this is like, so 1998, this is just beginning the popularization of the internet. So people are not connected in the same way. There wasn't ways for Iranians Americans to interact in the ways that there might be now. And that game, the game itself is not that important. I mean, it was a 2-1 victory for Iran, and it was Iran's first World Cup ever. So, of course, they were very excited about it. But actually, the diplomacy that preceded the game and the way that the players acted on the pitch is what stands out. And actually, the after the game, FIFA gave both teams the Fair Play Award, which gives you a sense of the importance of the game. There were quotes from people associated with the game, or in FIFA at the time, they were like, we managed to do at this game what politicians couldn't do in 20 years. So overall, there was a lot of good feeling about it. And right before the game, when the team was exchanging I don't know, handshakes or gifts. Like when I was reading about this, everything was pre-planned, like down to the smallest detail. So we're going to walk over, like the Iranians are going to walk over to the Americans. And somehow there was some kind of breaking of protocol in that, but they did it. They agreed on it. The Iranians gave the Americans white roses to symbolize peace. They took group photos together, which was not something that was done back then. It was all very well organized and like all the symbolism was just like in your face. There's no way you could misread it. The white roses for peace, etc. It was really lovely to see that and to see the game. And of course, as I said, the Iranians were very excited that they won, but it's really the game and the formalities around it is, in my opinion, the World Cup at its best and what it can be. I mean, it wasn't official, but it was close. It was semi-official since there was so much diplomatic arrangements beforehand about what what the process of gift exchange, et cetera, was going to be. And I think people were very receptive to it. Now, the next moment is that I also think is a very hopeful moment, despite it's the Qatar 2022 games. And as I just mentioned in my last answer, that was a terrible sort of set of circumstances for the Iranian team because of what was happening in Iran and because of the boycott that some people were promoting, but also because Iran and US relations had really deteriorated after Trump won and sort of did not get repaired under Biden. And so there was no like formalities or no prearranged, sort of carefully arranged exchange. But one of the things that happened, and I should mention this one, as I said, they did terribly in that World Cup and they lost. This time they lost to the US 1-0. And not only did they lose, but like the fact that they lost meant that they couldn't get out of the group. So if they had like equalized, they would have been able to. So it was like a double hit for them. And so it was like a bad game. It was a sad game. But after the game was over, there were the American players. So one of the Iranian players in particular was crying especially hard. They were all very upset. And which player was it? Now I can't remember his name. But one of the I know the Iranian player who was crying, Ramin Rezaian, because he was like visibly very upset. Oh, it was Anthony Robinson. He went over, he hugged him, he comforted him. There were other players on the field that were just sort of spontaneously hugging each other, and all the crying Iranian players. Um, and it was just it was just so heartwarming to see that. There wasn't a lot of emphasis on it, at the time, because the broadcasters also are well, yeah, let's say they're deliberate in what they choose to show and what they don't show. But that moment, the moments of the hugging and the crying and the camaraderie, that actually has an afterlife online now, and as does the 1998 moments. So those things, especially these days, I've seen them circulating a lot online. I think the fact that they have this afterlife and that it remains as a positive moment, and the second one I think is more significant than the first one because it's such a spontaneous, connection of athlete to athlete, person to person, that it seems even more real and genuine to me. And so that is what I find hopeful, and that's why I love. I mean, I'm a terrible athlete, but I love watching good athletes because you see these moments. And I should say, if Iran comes to the World Cup, and if both the US and Iran finish, I looked this up, it's if they finish second in their groups, they would play each other in Dallas. So there's a lot of ifs there. But maybe we'll see another moment like that. But yeah, absolutely, I think there's reason to be hopeful.
I think it's such a fantastic reminder that, we have these truisms that sport unites people, and oftentimes that feels very hollow. But there are times where it really comes through in these profound, authentic ways. And I think what you're describing is such a good example of that. So thanks for all your insights. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to folks in the room to ask a question. And then after that, we'll open it up to folks online. But before we do that, I did just want to make sure and mention your really compelling chapter in Abdullah Al-Aryan's book, Football in the Middle East, where you explore the ways in which women in Iran have utilized football both as fans and as participants, as sort of a tool for movements for greater human rights, greater women's rights. And I'd feel like we had missed an opportunity if I didn't ask you to talk a little bit more about why football is able to play that and how women in Iran have been able to take advantage of that role.
Sure. Yes. Thank you for asking about that and for promoting my chapter. It was a really fun chapter to write because it was supposed to be about Iranian football, and then I turned it into all the exciting things that happen around Iranian football, including fandom and spectatorship. But before addressing your specific question about how women have used football as a site for women's rights struggles and to successfully actually ask for equal access. I have to give kudos to the Iranian women athletes as well. As with all sports, women's athletics gets the short end of the stick. They don't have as much visibility. They just don't get celebrated as much. And so I have to say that although the Iranian football team, women's football team, they're not fantastic. They're not terrible, but they play on the world stage. In the Asian Cup, they've qualified and they've done well. But the Iranian futsal team, which is soccer played on a hard indoors, they have uh, achieved a lot of victories and international titles. So women's sports in general, there are a lot of great women athletes, and I hope that there will be many chances for folks to see the Iranian women athletes on a world stage. But the issue that I think you're asking about is how did Iranian women's rights and men's soccer, like what the heck is that connection? That's not the first thing you would think about if you're fighting for women's rights. How does men's soccer come into it? And the way it comes into it is that after the Iranian Revolution, so the revolution was 1979, in 1981, they women's access to stadiums was banned. But that's not to say they couldn't go to stadiums, they just couldn't go to men's games. And there's all kinds of like reasons that justifications that they gave for that. It was part of a broader sort of repositioning, new rules from a new, you have to cover yourself in such and such way. Now, women have successfully pushed back on both of those things. the stadium issue and the mode of dress, and the battle continues. There's a lot to be done. But for many years, it was sort of like a side issue. Like they weren't, women's rights movement in Iran, it's over 100 years old, and they had other things to deal with. And not to mention, there was also a war for almost a decade after the revolution. But at one moment, women decided that they were, oh, actually, I should say, so when women couldn't go to the stadium, it's not like they said, okay, we're gonna deal with other stuff and we're gonna ignore the stadium issues. There were for many years women would go to the stadium and they would dress up as boys or dress up as men and sneak into the stadiums. And there's actually a very good film about that. I mean, it's a very well-known phenomenon. It wasn't just like a couple of girls or a couple of really diehard fans. So that was going on for a long time. But in the early 2000s, Iranian women made stadium access like a key ask. It's not just all the other asks that we have. We want stadium access because this is our right to public space, just like the men's right to public space. And they really became successful, I think, when they asked for the help or they appealed to the sports international bodies, to the Asian Federation, to FIFA. I mean, to their credit, both of these sporting bodies, and we can talk forever about all the things that they've done wrong, but they were able to make conditions, so it's basically force the government's hand into allowing women into the stadium so that they can participate as fans. And the Iranian government also had mixed feelings about it. Like they also tried to use women to say, no, we're the ones who actually gave women their rights. It wasn't there were various administrations that tried to take credit for it, but the credit really goes to the Iranian women who fought for it and who very cleverly, I think, used international bodies to bring attention to this. And so, I mean, it's not a perfect thing because now they'll still put limits on how many seats are given to women versus men. The women have to be in their own section, but it's a battle that they really fought tooth and nail for, and they got it. It's one of those things that you can visibly see as a sign of success. So I think that too, there were people who questioned them when this was one of their asks. Like, of all the things you want to go watch football, like you must have no worries in life if your biggest issue is you want to go play football. No, it's symbolic of unequal access to other spaces. So I think that was the impetus and that was the reason for its success as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And I think that's a really important reminder that, even though we're focused on the Men's World Cup, because that's the one that's about to arrive in a couple months, that doesn't mean that it's only men who are involved in the World Cup in lots and lots and lots of different ways, and continuing to think through gender becomes really, really important in that. So thank you. So now I'd love to open it up to those of you in the room. Any questions? Remember, I will repeat the question so that folks online and you can hear it, Nikki.
Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Rights other diseases that holding all sorts of issues around the world using kind of leverage as the building bodies for.
Great question. So the question is, we talked a little bit about FIFA and the international bodies helping to promote rights in this one particular way. And as you mentioned, there are lots of ways to criticize that. But are there other examples of FIFA or similar bodies being used successfully to promote rights in other parts of the world?
Gosh, I'm not an expert on other parts of the world, I'm afraid. So that's not a question that I can give you a definitive answer, but I do know that uh, there are so many campaigns where folks have tried to go through the governing bodies as a way of, because they have leverage, right, in terms of whether a nation can even participate in games. So I know that there must be other campaigns. I do have to say, like, they had to convince FIFA, like one of the things that FIFA did that was very harmful to the Iranian women is that I think it was in 2011 or so, they banned hijab. And so the Iranian, it's like one of these classic things where the Iranian team is caught between two oppressive groups. Like the state made them wear a particular form of hijab, and then now FIFA was punishing them for for that very same dress that they were being forced to wear. And so maybe they had good intentions. I don't know, but that's how that was the rule. It hurt women's ability. I mean, they couldn't play. And then thankfully, other religious groups who were fighting back against the absence of uh, religious symbols got FIFA to change course. But yeah, I'm afraid I don't have answers to whether or not FIFA has the good things that FIFA has on. It's probably a much shorter list than the bad things. I hate to say it, but it's probably it probably is.
Yeah, and I agree, and I can just add like it's often a very mixed bag, and it's often sort of grounded in lots of self-interest. Um, but I do think there are interesting examples. So another thing I'm thinking of is that FIFA often recognizes national teams for different kinds of autonomous areas or semi-autonomous areas that aren't recognized in the UN or as a nation state. So, for instance, there's a Palestinian national team, both men's and women's when they don't have that kind of recognition in other settings, and that happens in for lots of other sort of regions that aren't recognized by the larger United body. So FIFA actually has more member states than the UN, which is an
Oh
interesting
wow. Yeah,
side.
that is interesting.
Okay, I have a question from online. How does soft power through soccer differ with the Iranian national team versus that for the American team? And how will the results influence that?
Um, so Iranian team as a soft power instrument of the state, or
I think that's my understanding, yeah, is that through soccer, so I think the question is mostly asking sort of what are the differences in how it operates for the Iranian national team versus the US team, thinking about that comparatively.
that's a really good question, and it's a complicated question because I think if if the Iranian team's relationship to the state was as like more straightforward, if they weren't under pressure from within the state, because as I was mentioning in our earlier conversations, there are many ways that state actors will put pressure on the team. And so because of that, I mean, they undermine their own soft power essentially, because if you are preventing your team members from authentically expressing their political views, then you're basically not you're making a bad reputation. You're showing the world that um, you're not a free country. If folks cannot act according to their own political and social leanings. So I think in that sense, Iran has not mastered the art of soft power through sports, which is again why I think it's so unfair and absurd for people who wanted to boycott them to say these are an instrument of the state. I think it's a much more complex relationship. Um, in terms of US soft power, I mean, uh, U.S. soccer, I think they're doing great. I mean, they're like ranked 11th, I think, something pretty good, as I don't know exactly what it is, but they're not a bad team at all. And historically, they were sort of made fun of, or like American soccer, I mean, was not one of our top sports, but I think the improvements in the team and the way that the team has conducted itself is a really good, like that's good soft power. That's successful soft power. And I think those instances that I explained to you, including the one at the 2022 World Cup, the way that the American team members acted, like that is just really lovely. And I think it goes a long way and countering the negative image that especially now the US has in the world. And so at the end of the day, despite everything, I think US soft power is very strong when it comes to sports. A, because of like the excellent athletes, but B, because it's not the same kind of pressures are not put on the US team, at least not visibly so, the way that the Iranian team is under pressure.
I think it's interesting to think about if that might be changing a little bit, if there's sort of increasing pressure on national team members or on sort of US athletes in general to sort of play a different role. I think traditionally there has been a little more of a, if not a firewall, at least a little bit of sort of space for athletes in that way. That may be breaking down a little bit. And it's interesting to think about if that actually hurts the soft power options for the US.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, another question from the room, please. Don't be shy. Oh, yes, please, in the back.
Conflict between the government and like the players association because the government is trying to say like we don't want them to go, we don't want them to play. It seems like the players want to play. So given this situation and any situations like this, if they don't come for whatever reason, is the players association held responsible and do like they receive punishment from FIFA, even if it is the central government telling them that they can't play even if they want to?
Okay, let me see if I can repeat it accurately. The question asker was laughing because they're literally as far away from me as they possibly can be in the room, and it's a fairly large room. So the question is the situation with Iran's team right now is sort of a classic conflict between the government sort of maybe saying you shouldn't play, but the players wanting to play, and sort of getting caught up in that. And if the team ends up not playing, do the players themselves end up receiving the punishment if FIFA sort of says, oh, you can't play, or you can't play in future, you're suspended for whatever reason for not sort of fulfilling your obligation? Yeah, sort of what are the dynamics there? Is that a fair representation of the question? Okay, yeah.
Okay, sure. Well, first I should clarify that the state's official position is that they are going to play. They want to play and they're going to play. There are rumors that there's internal sort of tension about forget this, we shouldn't do this, we should have nothing to do with the US. So we don't know. There's so much like there's the fog of war, first of all, that all this information was coming out of, but also even though we're in a ceasefire, there's still a lot of uncertainty. So we don't know, right? The official position is that they're going to go. Now, if Iran withdraws, first I should say, apparently FIFA has complete discretion then on which team will replace it. So the games will go on. Somebody will fill in that slot. Probably not Italy, but somebody will fill in that slot. But it depends on under what terms they withdraw. Like if they say we're unable to come because you will not be guaranteeing our safety again, or you haven't given our whole team visas. Like you gave just the minimum. We can't function without our coaches and our physical therapists and etc. If they have a legitimate sort of dossier that shows FIFA, hey, the host nation is not meeting its obligations of, making sure we're secure, et cetera, then I'm not sure. I mean, again, knowing FIFA, and they could go either way, but they may have grounds. They may have legitimate grounds for why they would withdraw, in which case they may not be penalized. But it would be a tragedy. I mean, it'd be terrible if they didn't come.
We have a question from online, which is quite closely related, actually. Do you have a sense of who in Iran is making decisions about participation in the World Cup? And who does FIFA talk to in Iran right now?
Yeah, that's the question everybody wants to know. Who is actually running anything? Well, there's the head of, so there's two people that are often quoted in communications or in news about exchanges between FIFA and Iran. So one is the head of the football association in Iran, and then there's the sports minister. So they're the sort of official spokespeople, and they're the ones who've communicated with FIFA. They're the ones who submitted official paperwork. I don't know if they submitted or they made a official request to have the games be moved to Mexico. So that's the point person. The question of who would make the ultimate decision, it's like we don't even know who's running the country. honestly like who is it, because everything has become sort of decentralized. Um, but if there is somebody, because of course a minister of sport answered to somebody, presumably to the supreme leader, in this case, president and supreme leader. Um, the only other thing I would say is that they have bigger fish to fry right now in terms of the current state of the country. Definitely, the World Cup is up there. It's not that people it's on people's radars. They're visible. The team is visible, as I was mentioning. They're visible in the news and going and visiting and being in demonstration, etc. But yeah, that was a very long way of saying I don't know who is in charge, but this is really. But those two figures are the ones that are in touch with FIFA as the official spokespeople.
Perfect. Thanks. Another question from the room. Yes.
So speaking of the river and the Gulf, so is that not going to be any other impacts on surrounding neighbors? Like also Iraq is in the FIFA in the World Cup, Saudi Arabia as well, Qatar as well. Are they going to be impacted as well? And then what are they going to do for the three countries that are in the Gulf, but they are also impacted by the war? So given that Iraq actually had a really hard time to play in the playoff in Mexico in March because they couldn't travel. So would that be also having any impacts on the countries that are qualified for the World Cup, but they are also in the area?
Good question. So the question is, given though the war is a regional war, what are the impacts on other countries who have also qualified for the World Cup? So Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Iraq just qualified through the playoffs and had a difficult time sort of pulling their team together and getting them to Mexico for those playoffs. So, what do you see as sort of the impact on those other three teams from the Gulf and sort of what they're facing as well?
I think they're in pretty good shape. I don't think they don't. I mean, you mentioned Iraq, the Bosnia game, right? That's who they qualified. Is that Was that the qualifying game? But they was a very exciting game because they hadn't qualified for a long time. I don't
Yeah.
think Iraq has an issue traveling because it's true that Iraq there were some exchange of fires with Iraq, but Iraq is pretty closely aligned with Iran, so I don't think that they're going to be coming under attack if hostilities resume. Qatar seems to be playing it very carefully. I don't see them coming under attack. Saudi Arabia is a different question, but also Saudi Arabia is a big country, has a lot of resources, has a lot of ability to have their team also practice in other spaces. Hopefully, I don't think that they would be impacted as much as the Iranian team. And they have good relationships with the U.S., so they don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Although, I mean, the visa stuff, that's going to impact everybody. Not necessarily players, but the fans. But hopefully, I think the war will not be impacting those teams' ability to participate.
Yeah, we haven't talked much actually about the impact on the fans and the traveling. I mean, we've talked a little bit about it, but it is interesting to think about that broader impact in terms of what the vibe will be like in the stadiums and if fans will actually be able to be there to support their teams. And of course, there are lots of other countries besides Iran who are also under the travel ban. So
Yeah, yes. I read in that Amnesty report that they said that they expected this World Cup to be the biggest sporting event in history or something like that. And I was kind of surprised in terms that I thought, because there's so much talk of boycotting the World Cup. Never mind the inability of people to come for visas, and not just for like political reasons, because the tickets are so expensive. So I'm sure you've heard of talk of all of that stuff. So I was surprised that Amnesty or that people are predicting that there will be uh, a lot of people coming, but absolutely it's going to have an impact on fans.
and that question of will the fan base be much more internal to either the United States or at least United States, Mexico, and Canada, sort of more
Yes,
regional travel rather
yes,
than transcontinental travel.
right. Which is sad because that's another thing about the sort of people to people connection, like everybody coming together and the camaraderie of the World Cup, even if you have a team rivalry or what have you.
Another question from online. Do you think there is a chance of defections of the national team members as happened in Australia for the women's team earlier this year?
I doubt it, and the reason I doubt it, I mean, the women's team, that was a whole other mess, and half of those defectors changed their mind. Um, but the reason I don't think that is because many of the best players play for some other team outside Iran anyway, and so if they wanted to, get out of Dodge or like leave Iran, they would have had opportunities to do so. So I don't really see that. I mean, it's not impossible, but again, that's one thing that there hasn't even been sort of chatter about. Again, because the Iranian men's team is way better than the Iranian. It's not. It's in the U.S. our women's team is like number one in the world, and the men's team is the weaker one. The Iranian team, even though they're good, they're not playing for international league good, the women's team. So they don't. So the men, I think, if they really wanted to defect or not come back to the country, they would have had ample opportunities.
That makes sense. Just for background for those of you who haven't followed it, so at the Asian Cup, Women's Cup this year, I think it was five Iranian players initially applied for asylum, and then two ended up staying. Three ended up going back, but two ended up staying in Australia. So I think we have time for one more question in the room. Yes.
I guess it was kind of already mentioned, but I was wondering like what FIFA's role in between like the tensions of that table. So for example, like if US says that they can't guarantee everyone team safety, like does FIFA have any sort of like anything on that, or like would they help the Iranian team in like securing visas, or they just kind of like they're just neutral and you guys figure it out like this stuff.
Fantastic. Yeah. So the question is, what's FIFA's role sort of as in terms of sort of almost as an intermediary between Iran and the US, or the Iranian FA and the US State Department, maybe in this case, if the US does prevent Iranian players from getting visas, for example, what's FIFA's role in responding to that?
So far, FIFA's public statements have been very diplomatic, and they've sort of emphasized that the ways that what the World Cup stands for, a place for great sportsmanship to shine and to sort of promote intercultural, inter-country communications, etc. Whether or not FIFA would step in to ask the administration to help with the Iranian visas, etc. That I don't know, because as you know, FIFA is very keen to have a good relationship with President Trump. They gave him that FIFA World Peace Prize or what have you. They might be worried about getting on his bad side with the current president of FIFA. So I can't really see FIFA sticking its neck out under the current leadership, both of the US and of FIFA. But again, to their credit, all their public statements have been very fair and encouraging of Iran to attend. So that's all I could say about that.
That also brings back something one of our earlier speakers, Mary Harvey, talked about, which was that the closer we get to the tournament itself, the more leverage the host city or the host federal government has, and the less leverage FIFA has. So the closer we get to the tournament, that ability to be an intermediary sort of shifts.
Right, that's a really good point, yes.
Yeah. So Niki, thank you so much. It's been so wonderful having you online with us today. Your insights have been really fantastic, and thank you so much for giving us a broader sense of some of the politics of all of this. I think, lots of people obviously have sort of heard, especially here in Seattle, because Iran is supposed to play Egypt here in Seattle. A lot about Iran maybe coming, maybe not coming, and learning some of that deeper background and historical context has been really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for all the great questions, both from the folks who are participating online and in person. And who knows, maybe they'll be, maybe I'll see you in Seattle at the games.
That would be fantastic. We'll look forward to that. All right. Thanks, everyone. A reminder that next week we will be having a session on workers' rights during the World Cup here in Seattle, which will include King County Council Member Teresa Mosqueda, along with Greg Ramirez from SEIU 6 and CJ Garcia from Working Washington and the Fair Work Center. So thanks again. Have a fantastic evening, and we'll see you next week. Take care, Niki.
Good night. Bye-bye.